Sometimes the most ordinary people make the most extraordinary choices. Emily Martinez thought she was just a receptionist, someone who answered phones, filed papers, and smiled at visitors in a downtown Chicago law firm. But on one cold Friday evening in November, she would discover that even the smallest voice can echo the loudest when it speaks the truth. What started as a simple conversation in an elevator would unravel a web of deception that reached far beyond what anyone could imagine. This is the story of how a woman who felt invisible became the most important witness in a case that would change everything.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Emily Martinez straightened the already perfectly aligned papers on her reception desk for the third time that evening. The digital clock on her computer screen glowed 6:47 p.m., and the 14th floor of the Harrison building had grown eerily quiet. Most of Fletcher & Associates' employees had rushed out hours ago to start their weekends, leaving only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of Chicago traffic 15 floors below. She gathered her navy blue cardigan from the back of her chair and slipped it over her shoulders. 3 years of working at this law firm had taught her to appreciate the small rituals that marked the end of each day. The satisfaction of a clean desk, phones forwarded to the answering service, and the prospect of her tiny studio apartment where she could finally remove the professional smile that had become as much a part of her uniform as the modest blazer she wore. Emily had always been the type of person who noticed everything but said little. During her time at Fletcher & Associates, she had observed the subtle dynamics between partners, the way certain clients received preferential treatment, and how some cases seemed to disappear from conversation without explanation. But she had learned early in her career that receptionists were expected to be invisible, present but unnoticed, helpful but not intrusive. As she reached for her purse, a sound caught her attention. Voices were coming from behind the heavy oak door of senior partner James Fletcher's office. This was unusual. Mr. Fletcher typically left by 5:30 p.m. sharp, always mentioning his wife's dinner plans or his son's baseball games. Emily paused, her hand still on her purse strap. The voices were muffled, but she could detect an urgency in the tone that made her uncomfortable. In 3 years, she had never heard Mr. Fletcher speak in such hushed, tense tones. The man was typically boisterous, commanding, the kind of lawyer who filled rooms with his presence and confidence. Emily tried to dismiss her curiosity. It was none of her business what conversations happened behind closed doors after hours. She was a receptionist, not an investigator. But something nagged at her. A professional instinct she had developed from years of managing the front desk of a law firm. She knew the rhythm of this office, the normal patterns of behavior, and something about this evening felt wrong. She walked slowly toward the elevator bank, her sensible heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. As she passed Fletcher's office, she couldn't help but notice that the voices had stopped. Complete silence now emanated from behind the door, which somehow felt even more unsettling than the whispered conversation. The elevator arrived with its familiar ding, and Emily stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to close, she heard Fletcher's office door open. She caught a glimpse of her boss's face, flushed, with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger or frustration, emotions she was accustomed to seeing during stressful cases. This looked like fear.
The elevator descended smoothly, floors ticking by on the digital display. Emily found herself staring at her reflection in the polished steel doors, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over her. She was probably overreacting. Law firms were high-pressure environments, and partners often worked late dealing with difficult cases or demanding clients. At the 10th floor, the elevator stopped and the doors opened to reveal Maria Santos, the night cleaning supervisor for the building. Emily had seen Maria countless times over the years, but had never engaged in more than polite greetings. Maria was a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "Emily, right?" Maria said as she stepped into the elevator, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. "You work for that law firm on 15. "Yes," Emily replied, surprised by the conversation. "Fletcher and Associates." Maria pressed the button for the 7th floor and then turned to Emily with an expression that immediately commanded attention. There was something urgent in her demeanor, a nervous energy that reminded Emily of the atmosphere she had just left behind in Fletcher's office. "I need to tell someone about something I heard," Maria said quietly, glancing around the elevator as if someone might be listening, "but I don't know who to trust." Emily's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "Last night, I was cleaning the offices on your floor. It was around midnight and I thought everyone had gone home, but I heard voices coming from Mr. Fletcher's office." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "I wasn't trying to listen, but when you're pushing a vacuum cleaner, you'll learn to pay attention to unusual sounds. Safety, you know?" The elevator continued its descent, but Emily felt as though time had slowed down. "What did you hear?" "Mr. Fletcher was on the phone with someone. He kept saying things like, 'We need to make this disappear,' and 'the Johnson case cannot go to trial.' He mentioned something about documents that needed to be destroyed and a witness who needed to be handled." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Emily, I've been cleaning offices for 15 years. I know the difference between normal legal talk and something that sounds wrong." Emily's mind raced. The Johnson case. She knew that case intimately, not because she was involved in the legal work, but because she had processed all the paperwork, scheduled all the meetings, and had spoken with Mrs. Sarah Johnson dozens of times over the past 8 months. Sarah Johnson was a 34-year-old single mother of 3 who had filed a discrimination lawsuit against her former employer, Meridian Industries. She claimed she had been fired after reporting safety violations that put workers at risk. It was exactly the type of David versus Goliath case that Fletcher and Associates used in their marketing materials, standing up for the little guy against corporate giants. But Emily remembered something else about the Johnson case. Meridian Industries was also a client of Fletcher and Associates, handling their corporate legal work worth hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. She had always wondered how the firm could represent both sides, but when she had quietly asked one of the junior associates, she had been told it was perfectly legal as long as proper safeguards were in place. "Are you sure that's what you heard?" Emily asked, though she could see in Maria's eyes that she was absolutely certain. "I'm sure. And there's something else." Maria glanced at the floor indicator. They were approaching the 7th floor. "I don't know what to do with this information," she said. "I need this job. I have 2 kids, and if I report something like this, and I'm wrong, or if they find out it was me," she shook her head, "but I keep thinking about Mrs. Johnson. She seems like a nice lady. She doesn't deserve to be cheated." Emily felt the weight of Maria's words settling on her shoulders. As the elevator doors began to close, Maria reached out and stopped them. "Maybe you could do something," Maria said. "You work there. You have access to things I don't. People listen to you." The doors closed, and Emily continued her descent to the ground floor. But her mind was spinning in the opposite direction. Maria's words echoed in the small space. People listen to you. Emily never thought of herself as someone people listened to. She was the receptionist, the person who took messages and transferred calls. She was part of the office furniture, noticed only when something went wrong. But Maria was right about one thing. Emily did have access. She had the master key codes for the filing systems, she knew everyone's schedules, and she had been present for countless conversations that people assumed she wasn't really listening to. What Emily was about to discover would turn everything she thought she knew about justice, loyalty, and courage completely upside down. Because sometimes the person you trust most is hiding the darkest secrets.
Emily walked through the lobby of the Harrison Building in a daze. The November evening air hit her face as she pushed through the revolving doors, but instead of the usual relief she felt leaving work, she was consumed by a growing sense of responsibility that felt almost crushing. She lived just 6 blocks away in a converted warehouse that had been transformed into affordable housing for young professionals. The walk usually cleared her head.
helped her transition from work mode to personal time. But tonight, every step seemed to echo with Maria's words and the memory of Fletcher's frightened expression. Her studio apartment was small, but carefully organized, reflecting the same attention to details she brought to her work. Emily set her keys on the small table by the door and stood in the center of the room, unsure what to do with herself. Normally, she would change into comfortable clothes, heat up leftovers, and spend the evening reading or watching Netflix. But tonight, normal felt impossible. She found herself pacing the small space, replaying every interaction she had ever had with Mrs. Johnson. Sarah Johnson was unlike most of the firm's clients. While many of their corporate clients were polished executives in expensive suits, Sarah was a working-class woman who always seemed slightly intimidated by the firm's marble lobby and expensive furnishings. Emily remembered the first time Sarah had come to the office. She had worn her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit that had seen better days, and had sat nervously in the waiting area clutching a worn manila folder containing what Emily now realized were probably the documents that supported her case. Over the months, Emily had watched Sarah's hope gradually dim. Initial meetings with Fletcher had been promising, filled with confident assurances that justice would prevail. But as time went on, Sarah's visits became less frequent, and when she did come in, she looked increasingly defeated. Emily recalled a conversation from just 2 weeks ago. Sarah had been waiting for Fletcher, who was running late from another meeting. Emily had offered her coffee, and Sarah had accepted gratefully. "I'm starting to wonder if I made the right choice," Sarah had said quietly. "This whole process has been so much harder than I expected. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just give up and move on." Emily had offered generic encouragement, the kind of supportive but non-committal response that receptionists were trained to give. She had told Sarah that legal processes took time, that Mr. Fletcher was very experienced, and that everything would work out fine. But now, remembering that conversation in the light of what Maria had overheard, Emily felt sick. Had Sarah been expressing doubt because she was beginning to sense that her own lawyer wasn't fighting for her? Had Emily's reassurances actually prevented her from seeking help elsewhere? Emily sat down at her small kitchen table and opened her laptop. She began researching Meridian Industries, the company Sarah was suing. What she found made her stomach drop even further. Meridian Industries wasn't just another client of Fletcher & Associates. They were their largest client. The company paid the firm over $800,000 annually for various legal services, including regulatory compliance, contract negotiations, and employment law guidance. The Johnson case, even if Sarah won the maximum possible settlement, would be worth maybe $200,000 in legal fees for the firm. The math was brutal and clear. Fletcher & Associates had a massive financial incentive to ensure that Sarah Johnson's case failed, or at least resulted in a settlement so small that it wouldn't impact their relationship with Meridian Industries. Emily spent the next 2 hours diving deeper into public records, news articles, and court filings. She discovered that Sarah's case was stronger than she had realized. Multiple former employees had reported similar safety violations, and there was documentation of Meridian Industries ignoring repeated warnings from regulatory agencies. But more disturbing was what Emily found about other cases. Over the past 5 years, Fletcher & Associates had represented several other individuals in employment disputes against companies that were also corporate clients of the firm. In every single case, the individual plaintiffs had either dropped their lawsuits or accepted surprisingly small settlements. Emily realized she was looking at a pattern of behavior that went beyond the Johnson case. Fletcher & Associates appeared to be systematically sabotaging individual clients to protect their corporate relationships. By midnight, Emily had filled several pages with notes and printed dozens of articles. She sat surrounded by evidence of what appeared to be a massive ethical violation, possibly criminal fraud. But she also realized that she was just a receptionist with no legal training, no authority, and no proof beyond overheard conversations and suspicious patterns. She thought about Maria's words. Maybe you could do something. But what could she realistically do? If she was wrong about her suspicions, she would destroy her career and reputation. If she was right, she would be going up against one of the most powerful law firms in Chicago.
Emily made herself a cup of tea and tried to think rationally about her options. She could report her concerns to the State Bar Association, but without concrete evidence, it would be her word against Fletcher's. She could try to warn Sarah Johnson directly, but what would she say? That she suspected her lawyer was betraying her based on a conversation overheard by a cleaning lady? As she sat in her small apartment, surrounded by printouts and notes, Emily realized that she had crossed a line. She was no longer just a receptionist who answered phones and filed papers. She had become someone with dangerous knowledge, and that knowledge came with responsibilities she had never wanted. But as she thought about Sarah Johnson's tired eyes and defeated posture, Emily knew she couldn't just pretend she had never learned what she now knew. The question wasn't whether she should act, it was how.
Emily barely slept that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through possibilities and consequences. By dawn, she had made a decision that terrified and energized her in equal measure. She needed concrete evidence. Everything else was speculation and hearsay. If she was going to risk everything, her job, her career, her comfortable if modest life, she needed proof that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Emily arrived at work on Monday morning with a sense of purpose that felt completely foreign. She maintained her usual professional demeanor, greeting colleagues with her standard smile and handling routine tasks with her typical efficiency. But underneath the familiar exterior, she was carefully observing everything with new eyes. Fletcher & Associates operated like most law firms, with different levels of security for different types of information. As the senior receptionist, Emily had access to general client files, scheduling systems, and correspondence. But the most sensitive documents, case strategies, financial records, and confidential communications, were stored in a separate system that required higher-level clearance. However, Emily had learned over 3 years that most people were surprisingly careless with sensitive information. Lawyers left documents on printers, discussed confidential matters in hallways, and frequently forgot to log out of computer systems. She had always been discreet about these security lapses, considering it part of her professional responsibility to ignore what she wasn't supposed to see. Now, she began to pay attention to everything. On Tuesday, her opportunity came unexpectedly. Mr. Fletcher was in court all day, and his assistant called in sick with the flu. Emily was asked to handle Fletcher's calls and manage his schedule, which meant working from the computer in his assistant's office, a computer that had access to the firm's complete case management system. Emily's heart pounded as she sat at the unfamiliar workstation. She had legitimate reasons to be there, legitimate work to do, but she also had the opportunity to access information that could confirm or dispel her suspicions about the Johnson case. She spent the morning handling Fletcher's calls and rescheduling his appointments, all while mentally noting the login procedures and security protocols. The case management system required a password that was changed monthly, but like many busy professionals, Fletcher's assistant had written the current password on a small sticky note attached to her monitor. On her lunch break, Emily returned to the office while most of the staff was out. She logged into the system and navigated to the Johnson case file. What she found there made her hands shake as she scrolled through document after document. The file contained multiple versions of legal briefs, and Emily could see a clear evolution in the firm's strategy. Earliest documents were aggressive and comprehensive, arguing forcefully for Sarah's position, and outlining a detailed plan for proving Meridian Industries' negligence and discrimination. But as the case progressed, the strategy had changed dramatically. Recent documents showed a legal approach that seemed designed to fail. Key evidence was being ignored, important witnesses were not being interviewed, and critical deadlines were being missed. Most damning of all, Emily found a memo from Fletcher to his legal team instructing them to manage client expectations and guide toward reasonable settlement discussions. The memo was dated 3 months ago. Around the same time, Emily had noticed Sarah Johnson looking increasingly discouraged during her visits to the office. Emily quickly printed the most relevant documents, her hands shaking as she fed paper into the printer. She felt like a criminal, even though she was increasingly convinced that the real criminals were the people she worked for. As she gathered the printed pages, Emily noticed something that made her stop cold. There was a folder on Fletcher's assistant's desk labeled Meridian Industries Retainer Agreement. She opened it and found a contract that made her previous discovery seem small in comparison.
The contract wasn't just for general legal services. It was specifically for what the contract termed litigation management services, helping Meridian Industries identify and mitigate potential legal threats from employees or former employees. The contract explicitly mentioned the Johnson case by name and included a bonus clause that would pay Fletcher & Associates an additional $500,000 if they could resolve the matter without significant financial impact to the client. Emily stared at the document, reading it twice to make sure she understood correctly. Fletcher & Associates hadn't just failed to properly represent Sarah Johnson, they had been specifically paid to ensure she lost her case. She photographed the contract with her phone, then carefully returned everything to its original position. As she walked back to her own desk, Emily felt as though everyone could see the guilt written on her face. But her colleagues continued their normal routines, treating her with the same polite indifference they always had. That evening, Emily sat in her apartment, studying the evidence that she had gathered. She now had concrete proof of what appeared to be criminal fraud. But she also realized that her situation had become much more dangerous. If Fletcher discovered what she had learned, the consequences would extend beyond losing her job. She thought about Maria's warning about witnesses being handled and wondered what that really meant. She thought about the power and resources of a major law firm and a large corporation, and she felt very small and very alone. But she also thought about Sarah Johnson and the other clients who had been betrayed. Emily realized that she might be the only person in a position to expose what was happening. She had evidence, access, and knowledge that no one else possessed. The question was no longer what she could do. The question was whether she had the courage to do it. But Emily was about to learn that in a game this dangerous, the people you trust most may not be who you seem to be, and the real mastermind behind the conspiracy was closer than she ever imagined.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily spent the next few days carefully documenting everything she could find. She created copies of schedules, correspondence, and financial records, building a comprehensive picture of how Fletcher & Associates was systematically betraying their individual clients in favor of corporate interests. But as she gathered more evidence, Emily became increasingly aware of how exposed she was. She was working alone, with no backup plan and no protection if she was discovered. She needed help, but she wasn't sure who she could trust. The answer came from an unexpected source. On Thursday afternoon, Emily was organizing files when she overheard a conversation between two junior associates, David Chen and Lisa Rodriguez. They were discussing the Johnson case, and their tone was troubled. "I don't understand why Fletcher keeps rejecting our research. We found 3 similar cases where plaintiffs won significant settlements. The precedent is clearly in Johnson's favor." "I know, and did you see the witness list Fletcher approved? He's excluded some of our strongest potential testimonies. It's like he's trying to lose the case." Emily felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't the only one who had noticed problems with the Johnson case. These were trained lawyers who were seeing the same red flags that had alarmed her. After the associates moved on, Emily made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She needed allies, and David and Lisa had already demonstrated that they were paying attention to the same issues that concerned her. That evening, Emily stayed late, waiting until most of the office had cleared out. She found David Chen still working in one of the junior associates' offices, reviewing case law on his computer. "David," she said quietly, stepping into his office and closing the door behind her, "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to promise me you'll listen before you say anything." David looked up, surprised by the serious tone in Emily's voice. He had always been polite to her, but they had never had a conversation that extended beyond work-related pleasantries. "Of course," he said. "What's going on?" Emily took a deep breath. "I think Fletcher & Associates is deliberately sabotaging the Johnson case, and I think it's part of a larger pattern of fraud that's been going on for years." David's expression shifted from surprise to concern as Emily laid out everything she had discovered.
She showed him the documents she had copied, explained the financial connections between the firm and Meridian Industries, and described what Maria had overheard. When she finished, David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. This is incredible, and it explains so much about why this case has felt wrong from the beginning. He looked up at Emily with an expression that was part admiration and part worry. Do you realize how dangerous this is? If Fletcher finds out what you've discovered... I know, but I can't just ignore it. Sarah Johnson trusts us to represent her, and instead we're being paid to make sure she loses. David nodded slowly. Lisa has been saying the same things you are. We've both been frustrated with the way this case is being handled, but we never imagined... He gestured at the documents. We never imagined anything like this. Will you help me? Emily asked. I don't know what to do with this information, but I know I can't do nothing. David was quiet for another moment, then nodded. Yes, but we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Fletcher isn't just unethical. Based on what you've shown me, he's criminal. People like that don't go down easily. Over the next week, Emily, David, and Lisa formed an unlikely alliance. They met in coffee shops and restaurants far from the office, sharing information and developing a strategy for exposing Fletcher's fraud. Lisa, who had experience in whistleblower protections, researched the legal procedures for reporting attorney misconduct. David used his access to legal databases to identify other cases that might follow the same pattern. Emily continued to gather documentation, using her position to monitor Fletcher's activities and communications. As they dug deeper, the scope of the corruption became clear. Fletcher and Associates was running what amounted to a protection racket for major corporations, taking money to neutralize legal threats from employees and consumers. The firm was making millions of dollars by betraying the clients they trusted most. But as their investigation progressed, Emily began to notice changes in the office atmosphere. Fletcher seemed more paranoid, asking unusual questions about who had access to certain files. His assistant returned from her sick leave but was reassigned to different responsibilities, with a new, more senior assistant taking over Fletcher's most sensitive work. Most disturbing of all, Emily realized that someone was watching her. She noticed colleagues paying closer attention to her activities, asking casual questions about what she was working on, and she had the unmistakable feeling that her computer usage was being monitored. They know something, she told David and Lisa during one of their evening meetings. I don't think they know exactly what we've discovered, but they're suspicious. Lisa leaned forward, her expression grave. Emily, I think you need to consider the possibility that there might be someone else involved in this conspiracy, someone who's been watching our investigation from the beginning. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Think about it, Lisa continued. How did Fletcher know to become suspicious? We've been careful, but somehow he's aware that something is wrong. Either he's incredibly paranoid or someone is feeding him information about our activities. David nodded grimly. Lisa's right. We need to assume that someone in our group might not be who they appear to be. Emily looked back and forth between her two allies, people she had come to trust completely over the past week. The idea that one of them might be betraying their investigation was almost too horrible to consider. But as she thought about it, she realized that Lisa was right. They had been careful, but not careful enough to account for the level of suspicion that Fletcher was displaying. Someone was giving him information, and there were only a limited number of people who could be doing it. What do we do? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We set a trap. We give each person slightly different information and see which version gets back to Fletcher. Emily felt the weight of paranoia settling over their small group. In trying to expose betrayal, they had created an atmosphere where they couldn't trust each other. But she also knew they had no choice. Too much was at stake to let personal feelings interfere with uncovering the truth. Over the next few days, Emily, David, and Lisa each received different pieces of false information about their investigation. Emily was told they were planning to contact the FBI on Monday. David was told they were meeting with a journalist from the Chicago Tribune on Tuesday. Lisa was told they were preparing to file a complaint with the State Bar Association on Wednesday.
On Thursday morning, Emily arrived at work to find Fletcher waiting for her at her desk. "Emily," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I need to see you in my office, now." Emily was about to discover that the person she trusted most had been playing a far more dangerous game than she could have ever imagined, and her life would never be the same.
Emily followed Fletcher into his office, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. The room felt different than it had during her previous visits, more threatening, charged with an energy that made her want to run. Fletcher closed the door behind them and gestured for Emily to take a seat across from his massive oak desk. She noticed that he didn't return to his usual position behind the desk, but instead sat in the chair next to her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne and see the tension in his jaw. "Emily," he began, his voice deceptively calm, "in 3 years, you've been an exemplary employee, reliable, discreet, professional. That's why what I'm about to tell you is so disappointing." Emily forced herself to maintain eye contact, even though every instinct told her to look away. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Fletcher." "I think you do." Fletcher leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the intensity of a lawyer cross-examining a hostile witness. "You see, I've recently become aware that someone in this office has been accessing confidential files without authorization. Someone has been copying sensitive documents and sharing information about ongoing cases." Emily felt her mouth go dry, but she forced herself to respond. "That sounds very serious. Do you know who's responsible?" Fletcher smiled, and for the first time, Emily understood why opposing lawyers found him intimidating. "I have a very good idea. You see, we've been monitoring computer access for the past few weeks. It's amazing what kind of digital footprints people leave when they think they're being clever." Emily realized that her hands were trembling and clasped them together in her lap. Fletcher was either bluffing or he had concrete evidence of her activities. Either way, she was in serious trouble. "The thing is, Emily," Fletcher continued, "I understand why someone might feel compelled to investigate things they don't fully understand. The legal profession can seem confusing to people without proper training. Sometimes what appears to be misconduct is actually just the complex realities of practicing law." Emily saw an opportunity and decided to take it. "Are you talking about the Johnson case?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Fletcher's expression shifted slightly, confirming that Emily had guessed correctly about the focus of his suspicions. "Among other things, yes. I imagine someone might look at that case and wonder why we've taken certain strategic approaches. Someone might even think we're not adequately representing our client's interests." "Aren't you?" Emily asked, surprising herself with her directness. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, and Emily could see him recalibrating his approach. When he spoke again, his voice was harder, less pretentious. "Let me explain something to you about the real world, Emily. Sarah Johnson's case was never going to succeed. Meridian Industries has resources, connections, and legal teams that could drag this litigation out for decades. Even if Sarah won every preliminary battle, she would be bankrupt long before she saw a penny in damages." Emily felt anger rising in her chest. "So you decided to make sure she loses?" "I decided to make sure she doesn't destroy her life pursuing a hopeless cause. By negotiating a reasonable settlement now, she gets something instead of nothing. Her children get to keep their home. She avoids years of legal bills and stress." Emily stared at him, recognizing the practiced nature of his rationalization. "And you get to keep your $800,000 client happy." Fletcher's mask slipped completely. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" "Yes, Meridian Industries is an important client. They employ thousands of people and contribute millions to the local economy. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. Choices like betraying the people who trust you. Choices like understanding that idealism doesn't pay the bills, or keep this firm operating." Fletcher leaned forward, his voice becoming more menacing. "But we're not here to debate legal philosophy. We're here to discuss what happens next." Emily felt a chill of fear but forced herself to ask, "What do you mean?"
I mean that you've put yourself in a very dangerous position. You've stolen confidential documents, violated attorney-client privilege, and interfered with ongoing litigation. Those are serious crimes, Emily, the kind that could result in years in prison. Fletcher stood and walked to his window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. But I'm not an unreasonable man. I understand that you thought you were doing the right thing. I'm prepared to be generous. He turned back to Emily, his expression businesslike. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return every document you've taken, delete every file you've copied, and never speak about this matter to anyone. In return, I'll arrange for you to receive a very positive recommendation and 6 months' salary as severance. You can find a new job and start fresh. No harm done. Emily realized that Fletcher was giving her a way out. She could take his offer, disappear quietly, and try to forget everything she had learned. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But as she sat in that office, looking at Fletcher's confident expression, Emily thought about Sarah Johnson's defeated posture during her last visit. She thought about all the other clients who'd been betrayed by people they trusted. She thought about Maria, who had risked her job to speak up about what she had witnessed. "And if I don't accept your generous offer?" Emily asked. Fletcher's expression hardened. "Then we'll be forced to take legal action. Corporate theft is a felony, Emily. You'll be facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete destruction of your professional reputation. No one will ever hire you for anything more significant than serving coffee." Emily stood up, her legs feeling unsteady, but her resolve surprisingly firm. "I need time to think about this." "You have until Monday morning," Fletcher replied. "After that, the offer expires and we pursue other remedies." Emily walked toward the door, but Fletcher's voice stopped her. "Oh, and Emily, I hope you haven't been foolish enough to involve anyone else in your little investigation. It would be very unfortunate if other people had to suffer consequences for your poor judgment." Emily left Fletcher's office feeling like she was walking through a nightmare. Her worst fears had been confirmed. Fletcher knew about her investigation and was prepared to destroy her life to protect his secrets. But as she sat at her desk, trying to process what just happened, Emily realized something important. Fletcher's threats had confirmed that everything she had discovered was true. His offer to make the problem disappear proved that he was guilty of exactly what she suspected. More importantly, his warning about involving anyone else suggested that he didn't know about David and Lisa. Her outlays were still safe, still able to act. Emily spent the rest of the day going through the motions of normal work, but her mind was racing with possibilities. She had until Monday morning to decide whether to accept Fletcher's deal or risk everything by continuing her investigation. But she also realized that Fletcher had made a crucial mistake. By confirming his guilt and threatening her, he had given her the final piece of evidence she needed to prove the conspiracy. Now she just needed to figure out how to use it without getting herself killed in the process.
That evening, Emily met David and Lisa at a small restaurant in Lincoln Park, far from their usual downtown haunts. She had chosen the location carefully, public enough to be safe, but private enough for confidential conversation. As she explained her confrontation with Fletcher, Emily watched her colleagues' faces carefully. She was looking for any sign that one of them had betrayed their investigation, any indication that Fletcher's knowledge had come from within their small group. "This is worse than we thought," David said, when Emily finished her account. "Fletcher isn't just unethical, he's dangerous. The way he threatened you suggests he's done this before." Lisa nodded gravely. "And the fact that he knows about the computer access means they've been monitoring the system more closely than we realized. We need to assume that everything we've done electronically has been tracked." Emily studied Lisa's face as she spoke. Something in her tone seemed different, more controlled than usual. "Lisa, how do you think Fletcher found out about our investigation?" Lisa met Emily's eyes directly. "I think someone made a mistake. Maybe we weren't as careful as we thought we were." David leaned forward. "Or maybe Fletcher was already suspicious for other reasons. Remember, Emily said she noticed changes in the office atmosphere before we even started working together." But as Emily listened to their conversation, she realized that something felt wrong. The trap they had set earlier in the week should have revealed which of them had been feeding information to Fletcher. But Fletcher's confrontation with her hadn't referenced any of the specific false information they had planted.
can I ask you both something? The false information we shared earlier this week about contacting the FBI, the Tribune, and the State Bar, did either of you mention any of that to anyone else? David shook his head. No, I've been careful not to discuss this with anyone outside our group. Lisa hesitated for just a moment before responding. Of course not. We agreed to keep this between us. Emily caught the hesitation and felt the chill of realization. She excused herself to use the restroom, but instead of heading to the back of the restaurant, she stepped outside and quickly called the office's main number. Fletcher and Associates, came the familiar voice of the evening answering service. Hi, this is Emily Martinez. I need to check if anyone left any messages from Mr. Fletcher about meetings scheduled for next week. Let me check. Yes, there is a note that someone called about rescheduling the State Bar meeting that was supposed to happen Wednesday. Should I transfer you to his voicemail? No, thank you. Emily ended the call with trembling hands. The State Bar meeting was the false information she had given to Lisa. Only Lisa knew about that fictional appointment, and somehow that information had made its way to Fletcher. Emily returned to the table feeling sick. Lisa Rodriguez, the junior associate who had seemed most concerned about the Johnson case, who had helped develop their investigation strategy, who had researched whistleblower protections, Lisa was working for Fletcher. But Emily forced herself to reign calm. If Lisa was reporting their activities to Fletcher, then Emily needed to be very careful about what information she shared next. I've been thinking about what Fletcher said. Maybe I should take his deal, cut my losses, and disappear before this gets any worse. David looked shocked. Emily, you can't give up now. We have evidence of criminal fraud. But Lisa nodded understandingly. I think Emily's being smart. Fletcher has resources and connections that we can't compete with. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. Emily felt her suspicions confirmed by Lisa's response. While David was encouraging her to continue the fight, Lisa was subtly pushing her to accept Fletcher's offer and abandon the investigation. I haven't decided yet, but I want to go back to the office tonight and make copies of everything we've gathered. If I'm going to disappear, I want to make sure someone else has access to the evidence. Lisa's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Is that wise? If Fletcher's monitoring the building's security systems, I have to risk it. This information can't die with our investigation. They agreed to meet again on Sunday to finalize their plans. But as Emily walked home, her mind was racing with the implications of Lisa's betrayal. How long had Lisa been reporting to Fletcher? Had their entire investigation been compromised from the beginning? More importantly, how could Emily expose Fletcher's conspiracy when her most trusted ally was actually working against her? But Emily was about to discover that in this deadly game of deception, even the people working against her weren't who they appeared to be, and the truth would shatter everything she thought she knew about loyalty, justice, and survival.
Emily spent Friday night planning her next move. If Lisa was working for Fletcher, then Emily needed to turn that betrayal into an advantage. She would feed Lisa false information while pursuing the real investigation through other channels. But first, she needed to understand exactly what Lisa's role was in Fletcher's operation. Was she simply a spy, or was she more deeply involved in the conspiracy? Emily decided to take a calculated risk. On Saturday morning, she called David and asked him to meet her at a coffee shop in Wicker Park. "David, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me you won't react strongly," Emily began once they were seated at a corner table. David's expression grew serious. "What's wrong?" "I think Lisa is working for Fletcher. I think she's been reporting our activities to him from the beginning." Emily explained about the phone call to the office and the false information about the State Bar meeting. David listened in stunned silence, his coffee growing cold as he processed the implications. "That's impossible," he finally said. "Lisa was the one who first raised concerns about the Johnson case. She's the one who suggested we investigate Fletcher's other cases." "Think about it," Emily urged. "What better way to control an investigation than to help lead it? Lisa has been involved in every aspect of our planning. She knows exactly what evidence we've gathered and what we're planning to do next." David was quiet for a long moment, and Emily could see him mentally reviewing their interactions with Lisa, looking for signs they had missed. "If you're right," he said slowly, "then Fletcher has been playing a much more sophisticated game than we realized.
He's not just reacting to our investigation, he's been controlling it. I know, Emily nodded, which means we need to completely change our approach. We can't trust anything we've shared with Lisa, and we have to assume that Fletcher knows about our evidence. So what do we do? Emily took a deep breath. We turn Lisa's betrayal against Fletcher. We use her to feed him false information while we pursue the real investigation through channels he doesn't know about. Over the next 2 hours, Emily and David developed a complex plan. They would continue to include Lisa in their meetings, but they would only share information that was designed to mislead Fletcher. Meanwhile, they would build a separate case, using evidence and contacts that Lisa had never been involved with. The key would be Maria Santos, the cleaning lady who had first overheard Fletcher's suspicious phone conversations. Maria had never met Lisa and had no connection to their official investigation. She could serve as their secret weapon. That evening, Emily returned to the Harrison building under the pretense of catching up on weekend work. She knew that Maria typically started her shift at 8 p.m., and Emily wanted to speak with her privately. She found Maria on the 12th floor, methodically cleaning offices with the same attention to detail she had observed for years. "Maria," Emily said quietly, "I need to talk to you. It's about what you told me in the elevator." Maria looked around nervously, then gestured for Emily to follow her into an empty conference room. "I've been worried about you. After our conversation, I started paying more attention to the conversations I hear during my shifts. There have been more phone calls, more whispered meetings. Something big is happening." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of conversations?" "Yesterday night, I heard Mr. Fletcher talking to someone about containing the situation. He mentioned your name, Emily. He said you were becoming a problem that needed to be handled." Emily felt a chill of fear, but forced herself to stay focused. "Maria, I've gathered evidence that Fletcher has been betraying his clients, but I need more proof, and I need someone he doesn't know about to help me get it." Maria listened as Emily explained what she had discovered, showing her copies of the documents she had obtained. When she finished, Maria was quiet for a long moment. "My cousin Rosa works for Meridian Industries. She's been there for 15 years, works in their human resources department. She might know about other employees who've been treated the way they treated Mrs. Johnson." Emily felt a surge of hope. Would she be willing to talk to us? "Rosa has always been angry about how the company treats workers. If she knew that their lawyers were helping cover up discrimination, yes, I think she would help." They arranged to meet Rosa the following evening at Maria's apartment in Pilsen. Emily would bring the evidence she had gathered, and Rosa would share what she knew about Meridian Industries' internal practices. As Emily left the building that night, she felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. Fletcher might have Lisa as his spy, but Emily was building a network of allies he knew nothing about. But as she walked home through the quiet downtown streets, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned several times, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the sensation of being followed stayed with her all the way to her apartment. Inside her building, Emily checked her mailbox and found something that made her blood run cold. Mixed in with the usual bills and advertisements was a plain white envelope with no return address, containing a single photograph. The photograph showed Emily and David sitting in the coffee shop that morning, deep in conversation. Someone had been watching them, documenting their meeting. Written on the back of the photo in careful handwriting were 4 words: "You're not as clever as you think." Emily realized that Fletcher's reach extended far beyond what she had imagined. He wasn't just monitoring their electronic communications and using Lisa as his spy. He was having them physically surveilled. As she sat in her apartment, staring at the photograph, Emily understood that the stakes of their investigation had escalated dramatically. This wasn't just about exposing legal misconduct anymore. This was about survival. But the photograph also told Emily something important. Fletcher was scared. People who are confident in their power don't resort to intimidation tactics. The fact that he was trying to frighten her meant that his investigation posed a real threat to his operation. Emily made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just 2 weeks ago. Instead of being intimidated by Fletcher's escalating tactics, she was going to escalate hers. She was going to bring down Fletcher and Associates, even if it destroyed her life in the process.
Sunday evening, Emily sat in Maria's small but warm apartment in Pilsen, surrounded by the evidence that would either save Sarah Johnson's case or get them all killed. Rosa Santos, Maria's cousin, was a woman in her late 40s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much workplace injustice. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me these questions," Rosa said as she reviewed the documents Emily had brought. "Meridian Industries has been systematically discriminating against workers, covering up safety violations, and silencing anyone who speaks out. But they're very good at making problems disappear." Rosa opened a worn notebook that she had brought with her. "I started keeping records 5 years ago when I realized that the company was destroying documentation of complaints and incidents. Everything I'm about to show you, I've kept copies of at home." Over the next 2 hours, Rosa revealed the scope of Meridian Industries' misconduct. She had documented dozens of cases similar to Sarah Johnson's: workers fired for reporting safety violations, employees who faced retaliation for filing discrimination complaints, and a systematic pattern of targeting anyone who threatened the company's image. "But here's what makes this really criminal," Rosa said, pulling out a folder of financial records. "Meridian Industries has a specific budget line item for what they call legal mitigation services. They pay Fletcher & Associates a monthly retainer to identify potential legal problems and make them go away before they become expensive." Emily stared at the financial records Rosa was showing her. The numbers were staggering. Meridian Industries was paying Fletcher & Associates over $100,000 per month just to sabotage potential lawsuits from their own employees. "Rosa, how did you get access to these financial records?" Emily asked. Rosa smiled grimly. "When you work in HR for 15 years, you get access to a lot of information that you're supposed to pretend you never saw. I've been making copies of everything that seemed suspicious. I never knew what I was going to do with it all, but I knew someday it might be important." Maria leaned forward. "Rosa, if Emily can expose what Fletcher & Associates has been doing, it could help all those people who were cheated out of their settlements." "More than that," Rosa replied. "If we can prove that Meridian Industries has been systematically violating employment laws, we're talking about potential criminal charges for the executives, massive fines, and compensation for dozens of wronged workers." Emily felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What had started as concern for one client had evolved into exposing a conspiracy that had harmed potentially hundreds of people over several years. "There's something else you need to know," Rosa continued. "Meridian Industries isn't Fletcher & Associates' only corporate client involved in this scheme. I've heard about similar arrangements with at least 3 other major companies in the Chicago area." The room fell silent as the implications of Rosa's revelation sunk in. Fletcher & Associates wasn't just betraying individual clients. They were running a systematic operation to help multiple corporations avoid accountability for their misconduct. "How do we prove all of this?" Emily asked. "Even with everything we've gathered, it's still going to be our word against some of the most powerful lawyers and executives in Chicago." Rosa reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. "We don't just prove it, we record them admitting it." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "I still work for Meridian Industries. I still have access to their offices and their meetings. And I know that tomorrow morning there's a scheduled conference call between Meridian's legal department and Fletcher to discuss the Johnson case specifically." Maria looked at her cousin with concern. "Rosa, if you're caught recording that meeting, then I'll be fired from a job I hate, working for people who disgust me. Emily, you're risking everything to expose these people. The least I can do is help you get the evidence you need to make it stick." Emily realized that Rosa was offering her the key to everything. A recorded conversation between Fletcher and Meridian Industries discussing their conspiracy to sabotage Sarah Johnson's case would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. "How would it work?" Emily asked. Rosa explained her plan. She would attend the conference call in her normal capacity as an HR representative. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Meridian's main conference room, and Rosa would use her digital recorder to capture the entire conversation. The beautiful thing is that they trust me completely, Rosa said. I've been in hundreds of these meetings over the years. They talk in front of me like I'm furniture. They have no idea that I've been documenting their illegal activities. Emily felt a mixture of hope and terror. This was their chance to get definitive proof of the conspiracy, but it was also incredibly dangerous for Rosa. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked. "If something goes wrong—" "Emily," Rosa interrupted, "I've been watching good people get destroyed by this system for 15 years. I've seen workers lose their homes, their health insurance, their dignity, all so that rich executives can make a little more money. If I can stop that, I don't care what happens to me." They spent the next hour planning the details of Rosa's undercover recording. Emily would wait at Maria's apartment during the meeting, and Rosa would call immediately afterward to report what she had learned. As Emily prepared to leave that evening, Maria walked her to the door. "Emily," Maria said quietly, "I want you to know how proud I am of what you're doing. A lot of people would have taken Fletcher's deal and disappeared, but you're fighting for people like Mrs. Johnson, people like me, people who don't have anyone else to speak up for them." Emily felt tears in her eyes. "I just hope we're not all getting in over our heads." "Maybe we are," Maria replied. "But sometimes that's what it takes to change things." As Emily walked home through the quiet streets of Chicago, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She had gone from being an invisible receptionist to being the leader of a growing alliance of people determined to expose corruption and fight for justice. Tomorrow, Rosa would risk her career to get them the evidence they needed. Emily would have to figure out how to use that evidence without getting them all destroyed in the process. But for the first time since this all began, Emily felt like they might actually win. But Emily was about to learn that when you're fighting the most dangerous people in the city, victory and destruction can look exactly the same, and a price of justice might be higher than anyone was prepared to pay.
Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Emily's mood as she sat in Maria's apartment waiting for Rosa's call. The plan was simple. Rosa would record the conference call between Meridian Industries and Fletcher and Associates, then immediately contact Emily with the results. But as 10 a.m. came and went with no word from Rosa, Emily began to worry. At 10:30, Maria tried calling Rosa's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By 11 a.m., they were both pacing Maria's small living room, imagining worst-case scenarios. Finally, at 11:45, Emily's phone rang. But it wasn't Rosa calling, it was David. "Emily, where are you?" David's voice was tight with panic. "Fletcher is looking for you. He seems furious, and he's got building security involved." Emily felt her stomach drop. "What happened?" "I don't know, but Lisa just told me that Fletcher received a phone call about an hour ago that completely changed his demeanor. He's been making calls and giving orders ever since. Emily, I think they know about whatever you were planning." Emily's mind raced. The only plan Fletcher could know about was Rosa's attempt to record the conference call, which meant that Rosa had either been discovered or— "David, I need you to do something for me," Emily said. "Call Meridian Industries and ask to speak with Rosa Santos in HR. Tell them you're following up on a job application. If she's there and available, we'll know she's okay." While David made the call, Emily tried to process what Rosa's discovery might mean for their investigation. If Meridian Industries and Fletcher knew about Rosa's recording attempt, they would assume that Emily was behind it. Her cover would be completely blown. David called back 5 minutes later with news that confirmed Emily's worst fears. "They said Rosa Santos no longer works for the company. When I pressed for details, they said she was terminated this morning for a violation of company policies." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility for Rosa's situation. Rosa had risked everything to help our investigation, and now she had lost her job and possibly worse. "David, I need to disappear. Fletcher knows I'm behind the recording attempt, and he's not going to give me until Monday to consider his offer anymore. This has become dangerous." "Where will you go?" Emily looked around Maria's apartment, realizing that this might be one of the few places in Chicago where Fletcher couldn't immediately find her. I'm going to stay here and figure out our next move. But David, I need you to do something important. Emily explained that David needed to contact Sarah Johnson immediately and warned her about what they had discovered. Whether or not their investigation succeeded, Sarah deserved to know that her own lawyers were working against her. And David, be careful around Lisa. We still don't know exactly what her role is in all of this. After ending the call, Emily and Maria sat in silence, processing the rapid escalation of their situation. Rosa had been fired, Emily was essentially in hiding, and Fletcher was actively hunting for them. But then Maria's phone rang. To their surprise, it was Rosa. Maria, I need you and Emily to meet me at St. Albert Church on 17th Street in an hour, and bring everything, all the documents, all the evidence. We're going to end this today. Rosa, are you okay? David said you were fired. I was fired, but not before I got what we needed. Emily's plan worked better than we could have hoped. But now we need to move fast because Fletcher and Meridian Industries are panicking, and panicked criminals do dangerous things. An hour later, Emily and Maria sat in a pew near the back of St. Albert Church, a beautiful old building that provided both privacy and a sense of sanctuary. Rosa arrived exactly on time, carrying a large manila envelope and wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. They caught me, Rosa said without preamble. About halfway through the conference call, someone noticed that I had a recording device. Security escorted me out immediately, and I was officially terminated within an hour. Emily's heart sank. So we don't have the recording? Rosa smiled for the first time that Emily had known her. Oh, we have the recording. I got 43 minutes of conversation before they discovered what I was doing, and Emily, what I recorded is going to destroy Fletcher and Associates and probably send several executives to prison. Rosa pulled a small digital recorder from her envelope and set it on the pew between them. They talked about everything: the systematic sabotage of employee lawsuits, the financial arrangements between Fletcher and multiple corporations, specific cases where they destroyed evidence and intimidated witnesses. They even discussed plans to neutralize you, Emily, if you didn't accept Fletcher's settlement offer. Emily felt a chill at Rosa's words. What did they mean by neutralize? Based on the context, I think they were planning to frame you for theft or file criminal charges that would discredit anything you might try to expose. But the important thing is that we have them on tape discussing criminal conspiracy. Maria leaned forward. So what do we do with this information? Rosa reached into her envelope and pulled out a thick stack of documents. While I was being escorted out of the building, I managed to grab some additional files that I think you'll find very interesting. The documents Rosa had taken included financial records showing payments from multiple corporations to Fletcher and Associates for litigation management services, internal emails discussing specific strategies for sabotaging employee lawsuits, and a list of over 40 cases where individual plaintiffs had been systematically betrayed by their own lawyers. Emily, this is incredible, Emily said, reviewing the evidence. But how do we use it without putting ourselves in more danger? We don't handle this ourselves anymore, Rosa replied. This is too big and too dangerous for us to manage alone. We need to turn everything over to people who have the authority and resources to investigate properly. Rosa explained that she had already contacted the FBI's white-collar crime unit and arranged to meet with federal agents that afternoon. She had also reached out to investigative journalists at the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. But Emily, Rosa continued, they're going to want to talk to you. You're the one with the most complete knowledge of Fletcher's operation, and your testimony will be crucial for any prosecution. Emily realized that Rosa was asking her to make the final commitment to their investigation. Meeting with federal agents would make her a formal whistleblower, with all the protections and dangers that status entailed. If I do this, there's no going back. Fletcher will know that I've chosen to fight him instead of accepting his deal. He already knows that. The moment I was caught recording that conference call, he knew you were still investigating. Emily, you're not safe whether you cooperate with the FBI or not.
The only difference is whether Fletcher gets away with his crimes. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her responsibility, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Everything she had built over 3 years, her job, her reputation, her comfortable, if modest life, was already destroyed. The question now was whether that destruction would have meaning. She thought about Sarah Johnson's defeated expression during her last visit to the office. She thought about all the other clients who had been betrayed. She thought about Rosa, who had just lost her job to help expose the truth. "Okay," Emily said. "Let's go talk to the FBI."
6 months later, Emily sat in the witness chair of a federal courtroom in downtown Chicago, looking out at a gallery packed with journalists, legal professionals, and former clients of Fletcher and Associates. The scene was surreal. The quiet receptionist who had once felt invisible was now the center of one of the biggest legal scandals in Chicago's history. The prosecution's case had been devastating. The recordings Rosa had obtained, combined with the documents Emily had gathered and testimony from dozens of betrayed clients, had exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond anyone's initial suspicions. Fletcher and Associates had systematically defrauded hundreds of clients over a 5-year period, earning millions of dollars by ensuring that individual plaintiffs lost cases against their corporate clients. James Fletcher himself sat at the defendant's table, a broken man who bore little resemblance to the confident lawyer who had once intimidated Emily in his office. Federal charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice had ended his career and would likely result in a lengthy prison sentence. But the most shocking revelation had come during the investigation into Lisa Rodriguez's role in the conspiracy. When FBI agents interviewed Lisa, expecting to find a willing conspirator, they discovered something completely different. Lisa hadn't been working for Fletcher. She had been working for the FBI. For over a year, Lisa had been a federal informant, gathering evidence of Fletcher's crimes as part of a broader investigation into corruption in Chicago's legal community. Her apparent betrayal of Emily's investigation had actually been an attempt to protect Emily while ensuring that the federal case remained intact. The hardest part was watching Emily think I had betrayed her, Lisa had explained to the FBI agents. But if I had revealed my real role, it could have compromised years of investigative work and put everyone in danger. Emily learned about Lisa's true identity during a private meeting with federal prosecutors, and the revelation had been both a relief and a source of complicated emotions. Lisa's deception had been justified, but it had also meant that Emily had faced her greatest moments of danger without knowing that federal agents were monitoring the situation. Now, as Emily concluded her testimony in Fletcher's criminal trial, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The quiet, invisible receptionist was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own power to effect change and seek justice. Emily had testified in 3 separate trials over the past 6 months. Fletcher's criminal trial was the most significant, but there had also been civil trials brought by dozens of former clients seeking damages for the fraud they had suffered. The financial penalties against Fletcher and Associates and the corporate clients who had participated in the conspiracy totaled over $50 million. Sarah Johnson had been one of the first clients to file suit after the scandal broke. With proper legal representation, her case against Meridian Industries had resulted in a $2.3 million settlement that allowed her to pay off her debts, secure her children's education, and start a small business of her own. But the personal costs had been significant as well. Emily's career in the traditional legal field was essentially over. No major law firm would hire someone known for exposing her former employer's crimes, regardless of the justification for her actions. However, Emily had discovered opportunities she never could have imagined. Her testimony and advocacy had attracted the attention of legal aid organizations, government oversight agencies, and NGOs focused on corporate accountability. She now worked as an investigator for a nonprofit organization that helped whistleblowers expose corporate misconduct. The work paid less than her receptionist position had, but Emily found it far more fulfilling. She used the skills she had developed during her investigation of Fletcher and Associates to help other people in similar situations, employees who suspected their employers of criminal activity, clients who believed they were being betrayed by their lawyers, ordinary people who had discovered extraordinary corruption.
Rosa Santos had also found new purpose after losing her job at Meridian Industries. She now worked alongside Emily at the same nonprofit organization, using her decades of corporate experience to help investigators understand how large companies hide evidence of misconduct. The partnership between Emily and Rosa had proven remarkably effective, with their combined skills resulting in several successful investigations over the past 6 months. Maria Santos had kept her job as a cleaning lady, but her role in exposing the Fletcher conspiracy had earned her recognition as a community hero. She had been featured in newspaper articles and had spoken at several conferences about the importance of ordinary people speaking up when they witness wrongdoing. David Chen had left Fletcher & Associates before the scandal broke, accepting a position with the prosecution's office that had handled Fletcher's criminal case. His inside knowledge of the firm's operations and his cooperation with the investigation had been crucial to securing convictions. As Emily left the courthouse after her final day of testimony, she was approached by a young woman who looked familiar but whom Emily couldn't immediately place. "Miss Martinez," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. I'm a receptionist at Morrison & Partners downtown." Emily shook Jennifer's hand, immediately understanding why the woman had sought her out. "I've been reading about your case in the newspapers, and I think something similar might be happening at my firm. I've noticed some things that don't seem right, and I don't know what to do about them." Emily looked at Jennifer, young, nervous, caught between her desire to do the right thing and her fear of the consequences, and saw herself 6 months ago. "Would you like to get coffee and talk about it?" Emily offered. As they walked away from the courthouse together, Emily realized that her story wasn't ending, it was evolving. The skills she had developed, the courage she had found, and the network of allies she had built weren't just tools for fighting one case of corruption. They were resources she could use to help other people in similar situations. Fletcher & Associates no longer existed. James Fletcher would spend the next 7 years in federal prison. Meridian Industries had paid massive fines and implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent future misconduct. But more importantly, Emily Martinez had discovered that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they were willing to risk everything for justice. She had learned that the most powerful weapon against corruption wasn't legal expertise or financial resources. It was the courage to speak truth to power, even when the personal costs seemed overwhelming. The receptionist who had once felt invisible had become a beacon of hope for other people fighting their own battles against powerful, corrupt institutions. And as she sat down with Jennifer Walsh to hear about another potential conspiracy, Emily knew that her real work was just beginning. The system had tried to silence her, but instead she had found her voice, and she was going to use it to help others find theirs.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.